welcome Professor Rupert Wegerif and Dr. Peter Dudley from the Digital Education Futures Initiative, or DEFI for short. DEFI was launched earlier this year at Hughes Hall here at the University of Cambridge, with its mission being to creatively explore the field of possibilities that digital technology opens up for education. So that's really critical conversations to be having right now. DEFI works collaboratively with partners in industry, in policy and practice, and offers research-based answers to some of the big questions that new technology raises for education. So in this session, Rupert and Pete are going to talk about some of the work they've been doing, with a focus particularly on one project, which is the Classroom Learning Research Exchange. Rupert is Professor of Education at the University of Cambridge, and he is the director of DEFI. His research focuses on education for dialogue in the context of the internet age. And he's co-lead with Sarah Hennessy of the Cambridge Educational Dialogue Research Group and co-convener of the Argumentation, Reason and Dialogue Special Interest Group at the European Association of Research on Learning and Instruction. And Pete lectures in leadership and learning at the Faculty of Education here at Cambridge. He taught in both secondary and primary settings before moving into school improvement. And he helped develop learning networks of schools with the National College for School Leadership before leading Labour's primary national strategy from 2005 to 2011. And he was also Director of Education in Camden, where he led the creation of not-for-profit schools-led improvement company Camden Learning. Pete's belief in the importance of collaboration, inquiry and dialogue in professional learning is a key reason for his current work to create a global classroom learning research exchange with Dr. Sarah Hennessy, and we'll hear a bit more about that in a minute, and with Hughes Hall Bridge and the DEFI team. So with that said, I think Rupert, you're going to kick us off. So over to you, Rupert.
Oh, thank you very much, Jane, for introducing me. And I'm delighted to have this opportunity to share some of the ways in which we're exploring new possibilities of education. I'll just share my screen, see if I can at least get that little bit of technology to work. I hope it is. All right. As Jane mentioned, the DEFI, the Digital Education Futures Initiative, is trying to work together now with partners in industry, in policy and practice to creatively explore the sort of things that are possible now that weren't possible before. Basically, our understanding is that quite a lot of education, which hasn't actually been around as an organized mass compulsory system for nearly as long as people realize. In many places, only 100 years, 150 years. And quite a lot of what we do is based on previous technologies like print. And now with the internet, with mobile phones, with artificial intelligence, there are many new ways of doing education. But of course, it'd be dangerous just to leap into them and try things out just because they're possible. What decision makers at every level need is evidence. And therefore, we're doing a number of research projects going beyond. Obviously, we're doing literature reviews and that sort of thing, but we're particularly interested in design-based projects. That means learning by doing, by making things work, iteratively seeing what consequences they have, what bits work and which bits don't. One of our most exciting large-scale design-based research project, in my view, is Pete's going to tell you about later. We're now calling it CAMTREE, the Classroom Learning Research Exchange, after a lot of discussions, deed polls and talks to lawyers, is now signed up as Cambridge TREE, Teacher Research Exchange. And I think that's an example of the kind of project that DEFI is supporting. And Pete will say a lot more about that later. So I'll just run over some of our other things, what we're trying to do. But we're not just interested in standing back and doing this normal research thing of contemplating what's going on and writing papers about it. We actually want to get involved. And for that, of course, we need support. I meant to say, I'm hoping that you'll go to our website and sign up and collaborate with us. We also, of course, need lots more funding. So if you know any friendly billionaires who are interested in that sort of thing, send them our way. Some of the things we're doing is one of the ARM Education, which is very much a Cambridge company, are supporting us. And talking to them, they were very keen that the whole Cambridge ecosystem was brought together to speak as one voice, to learn from each other. And so it's one of the things we're doing is about communication and webinars. So I'll mention that in a minute. We're also producing white papers based on the latest rigorous research on different key issues. And we have then a number of projects, too many to mention. I'll just mention a few. We're working on addressing the fake news problem by teaching young children how they can think more critically about information they get from the internet. We're looking at ways of redesigning social media so that it's more effective for education and for producing global citizenship. I'll share with that. And one big project that's been funded by British Telecom and Huawei is looking at opening up education to enterprise outside of schools, but in a safe and protected way, called the Simulated Virtual Internships Project. So all of these, most of these are design-based research projects where we work with partners to try things out, see if they work, so we can produce evidence that could then serve as a catalyst for change. Because I imagine ministers and policymakers at every level are not keen to do things unless they can actually know what the real consequences are. And that's the evidence we're trying to provide. Just our first role in developing the Cambridge Forum, this is just to illustrate, please do go to our website. As I say, you can sign up for newsletters and so on. One event that's coming up on Thursday, the 22nd, will include Thomas Bonet, head of the Cyber Lab at the Institute of Manufacturing. So that illustrates how we're trying to get experts from Cambridge, and including, of course, Cambridge University Press, Cambridge Partnerships for Education, and also the Cambridge enterprises linked with Cambridge, to speak about their innovation so that we can broadcast this to the world. We also, of course, have a YouTube channel with our previous events. We had a very good one on the digital divide that included input from Raspberry Pi, another Cambridge company. The idea is there's a lot of expertise in fragments around Cambridge, and we're trying to bring it together. I'll just illustrate briefly one of these projects I mentioned. This is stimulated by the idea that schools have become rather closed off from the real world, and children don't always develop the skills that they need for the workplace, but also the attitudes, in the sense that, well, it's surprising how many children, when you ask them about jobs and engineers, they only have information they've picked up from TV movies and cartoons. So in this way, we're trying to give them a taste of what it's like to be involved with real workplaces, but without the difficulties of actual internships. So it's quite young children, 12 and 13. And this isn't an actual internship, it's a pedagogy. It works like this. We'll get somebody from the company. So in this case, we work with BT and Huawei, but we could work with any other companies. We worked in opportunity areas, i.e. areas of relative deprivation, where it wasn't actually easy to have a shiny high-tech company next door that you could visit. And we think this could provide an opportunity for everybody. So we worked with these companies to create a scheme of work, which involved, for example, a video from a CEO or other leading person setting out the challenge to be addressed. And then the children in teams would work collaboratively to address that challenge. In this case, for example, with British Telecom, they wanted to understand the Internet of Things and how that could be used in the home. We are experts really on the collaborative learning, the problem-based learning. So they worked together, and at the same time, they were informed by videos from engineers explaining how they solve problems and how they tackled these sort of things. So at the end, they produced a product which was judged either by the people from the companies or people on their behalf using their criteria. The point was, it was a simulation of working as a team, kind of like a video game. Here's an example of Lisa Perkins, who's head of research at Astra Park in British Telecom, setting out the challenge to the children, which they were then going to work on. There's just one example. I've just got a couple of others which I'll get through quite briefly before handing over to Pete. One is where we're addressing the fake news agenda. So this is ready to go, and we're now working with a lot of schools basically to teach critical thinking, so that when children see information on the internet, they don't automatically believe it. And that's pretty effective. So it's a method of teaching them basically critical thinking together in groups, which is quite effective. One project which we're negotiating on with partners would be to address global challenges working in small teams. And this is about global citizenship. So on this one, we want to get teams of young people from different countries, different places, working together. I knew it was going to happen. Sorry about that. Working together to solve global challenges using our collaborative learning methods. Sorry, very sorry about that. I'm trying to keep the timing right for Pete. I'll hand over in just a second, Pete. And this is a way of developing these future skills of teamwork and of enterprise, above all of enterprise, of not seeing reality as something that's fixed, but of finding ways to change it. And we're going to start off by addressing the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. So thanks very much. And now Pete is going to tell you about our most exciting project, which is where we're getting a global platform to get teachers to work together. But do follow us on our website, sign up, and do follow us on Twitter. Thanks again.
Thank you, Rupert. And over to you, Pete.
Thank you very much, Rupert. It was really good to hear all that, and so kind of you to demonstrate one of DEFI's most technological new ideas for how to very subtly remind a speaker that they've come to their time. It was superb. What I'd like to do is to talk about Camtree. A couple of years ago, I spoke at this conference, and maybe some of you might have been there. And the subject of my talk was what kinds of professional development have the biggest impact on, ultimately, on learners learning, okay, students learning. So I'm talking about teacher professional development that makes a big difference for students learning. And the method that we arrived at in that was looking at an approach that originally developed in Japan called lesson study. And in Japan, teachers use this inquiry-based classroom research approach, not just to improve the learning of their own students, they do it collaboratively with other teachers. So it improves the learning of lots of students. And nationally, they collect these lesson studies and they analyze them and they develop their education policy, not just on what people around the world are doing, but also on what's happening in these classrooms. And so, and I actually shared an example of a piece of research that I was just starting, looking at how teachers using lesson study with global English, for example, might be able to develop approaches which improve the way that their children learn global English, so therefore the way they're teaching global English, but can also perhaps feed back to global English. And I'll come back to that later on, but it's also led to something which we've been developing really for the past 2.5 years, certainly since before the pandemic, which, as Rupert has said, is this, this idea of the Cambridge Teacher Research Exchange, which I'm hoping that you can now see. And the idea of this is, I think, quite simple, but potentially very, very powerful. And I think it's something that we know teachers will enjoy being involved with because, well, for a start, I piloted it nationally, a similar idea about 12 years ago, and there was huge interest and engagement from around the world. So I'll describe what it is. It's about this idea of teacher learning from their own classroom research, sharing that with colleagues and more widely around the world, and the sum total of those research projects helping to inform educational policy around the world. Overwhelming evidence demonstrates that systematic, collaborative teacher-led inquiry into their own practice promotes student learning gains, develops the capacity of teachers and institutions, and actually whole systems when you can get the communications right. And it can do this in a much more sustainable way than conventional professional development courses, partly because teachers love doing it. They don't want to go away necessarily and sit in a conference center and have a nice lunch. And it doesn't necessarily change their practice when they get back to school, but they do enjoy working together on improving their children's learning, their students' learning. And so where schools build it into the way that they function, in the same way they build in parents' evenings and school performances and other professional learning, it becomes enormously sustainable. And of course, it's developing all the teachers all the time. And from my point of view, when I look at the legal profession, my wife is a lawyer, and she gets into her office every afternoon from court, and she sees new knowledge, new legal knowledge about criminal law that's been created that morning in courts around the country. And medical practitioners are consistently involved through their careers on shaping policy. I don't think teachers, we are involved in the same way, certainly not in this country. So it's also, I hope, a way of enabling practitioner voice, teacher voice and experience and innovation to inform policy. And this is how it works. First of all, it's creating a global community of classroom researchers, teachers, and school leaders and middle leaders who like conducting and supporting and gathering and publishing or sharing their classroom inquiries. So that's the first thing in the top corner there. The second thing it's going to do is to provide training and coaching, so those people can explore new ways of doing it, can improve the way they do it or make the way they do it more rigorous. And it can also enable some of those really good people to coach other people in collaborative classroom inquiry formed. As Rupert said, we're very keen on, because we know the impact of inquiry and talk for learning and learning for talk. The third thing it's going to be, as I've said, is a big author, a publisher, a library of, we hope, tens of thousands ultimately, teacher research reports and syntheses. They might be lesson studies, they might be action research, they might be case studies, but they will enable us to gather information about what's working for teacher learning, for student learning in different subjects, and not just share that with our members, but also share it with people who need to know, like policymakers. And the final thing that the platform is going to do is to enable groups of teachers and schools, even whole systems, even a whole country, to operate a domain in country so that they can have their schools working together. They've got an online community which is safe, and they can badge it up as their own community. They know that other people won't be able to see it, but they can share certain things. And they can also get certain things from other such communities. And as we move on with more inquiries and more data, the site will be able to suggest other people who are looking into this. And there's a particular school in another country who've been looking at this for 2 years. You might want to make contact with them. So it will become a kind of a sort of dating agency for teacher research and practice knowledge. And so those are the four things it's going to do. We've done a lot of work on designing and already user testing aspects of the site, and we're hoping to launch later this year. So I'll just finish off by sharing that example from China, where the for over a period of 2 years, teachers using global English in classrooms in northern China with quite young children used lesson studies to analyze their lessons using global English. And they found all sorts of things out, from studying the learning of the children, which is what you do in a lesson study, in a very systematic way, and thinking about what they should learn and then finding out what they actually do. And they were really wanting to improve the levels of pupils talking, children talking in those lessons, and reduce the amount of teacher talking. And only after, I think, 3 cycles of research lesson study, they had transformed their classrooms. Teacher talk was down 80%, and student talk was up about 60%, 70%. So there was a big transformation, and students were using much more involved sentences, not one-word answers to questions, but giving views. So there's an example of how you can use teacher inquiry to improve student learning through using that systematically. And that's certainly one of the studies that's going to go on to Camtree. But there's also Yingji, who is the Chinese person who was carrying out that research, is also going to be talking about that next week in the Oracy Cambridge online conference. So before I stop talking, I'll just put a link to that for anybody who's interested. You can follow up then. But that's me done, Jane. I hope I've given a an outline of what we're hoping to do and the possibilities.
Thanks, Pete. You have, and thanks, Rupert, as well. And I love the fact that this event, this session actually will encourage those people who are watching it to get involved, because there's so much there to get involved in. That's fantastic. I wanted to ask, actually, Rupert, at the beginning, you said that DEFI was looking at the things that are possible now that didn't used to be possible. And actually, I think probably, given that what we've all experienced globally over the past 18 months, it's more about the things that are essential now that didn't used to be essential. With that in mind, I know you launched in the middle of COVID, and I'm interested to know, given that we all now have a much sharper focus on the role of technology and digital learning in education, do you think, well, first of all, was COVID anything to do with the timing of your launch? And also, what do you think will happen with DEFI as a result of this increased focus now on digital teaching and learning?
No, Jane, it was entirely fortuitous. We honestly, we did not organize the global pandemic that led everyone to go online, but I have to admit it was quite helpful in promoting the interest, including interest of governments and of companies. So it became essential then, with so many people working together on Zoom, you could see the kind of research that was needed. I'm so sorry, can you just repeat the second question?
I was just interested to know whether or not the impact of the COVID lockdowns is going to sort of steer some of what DEFI looks at, or if it just, as you said, happens to be exactly what you were going to be looking at anyway.
Well, obviously, when people are going, people are going back now to education as before, but not completely as before. I was just talking today to somebody in India who are exploring new hybrid methods of doing the curriculum, because people have discovered the enormous potential, not only of working from home, but also the value added. Apparently, many children who've had good internet access and support in some cases have been learning more effectively now with all this access to global resources that you can get through the internet than they were in classrooms. So we don't want to lose the positive in going back to the traditional system. And a lot of people are exploring new hybrid methods, and that's what we want to work with them on doing. It's exciting, really, because people have seen the potential that's been there for quite a long time. Even in Cambridge, they had to make many changes, like not having these strange sit-down exams with bits of paper that people write on by hand. And not everyone wants to go back to the old model because they've seen the potential of new ways of doing things. So that's, hopefully where we'll come in.
I think you're right. I think there's a much greater dialogue amongst all stakeholders now about that role of technology in education. So it's a good time to be doing what you're doing. And Pete, you talk about this fantastic library of teacher research that's going to be developed through CamTree. And I'm interested to know how you see that evidence informing everything, practice, policy, everything that might happen after it.
I think there are a number of ways in which it will. I think there are 3 levels, Jane, that it will do that that job at, and the first is the school level. I've been responsible for lesson study developments for about 20 years, and I've repeatedly seen what one group of teachers discover in a classroom, which seems quite a small thing. A really good example would be some teachers in one of my schools in Camden who were doing a lesson study on mathematics, and they discovered, and they'd never known this before, they discovered that there was a whole group of children in that class who would be using the word double to mean double, but also to mean multiply. So they thought that double and multiply were synonyms, and in that particular lesson, it didn't matter, it worked for the mathematics they were doing. But you can see that conceptually, that's going to be a big problem down the road when you get to the next year or 2 or 3 years, and you're doing more complicated things and using the word multiply. So, and then they discovered that that was true in other classrooms in that school, and it was partly to do with the language interaction with English from their first language, and then we discovered it was happening all over the borough. So that was something, a very small thing that was changing policy and practice in one classroom and one school, and then across a whole group of schools. And of course, if it's very unlikely that a really big national trial of different interventions is going to discover something like that. And actually things like that can really mess up the results of big trials because they're not aware of these classroom level things. So this is the value of teacher classroom research. And we will be able to not just publish and celebrate the fantastic work that teachers are doing in their own right, but we'll also be able to search, systematically review all these studies and then do meta studies of those reviews, and we get tens of thousands. And we'll probably be able to discover really important patterns of, it may be teaching, it may be pedagogy, it may be the way the students are thinking about things, it may be the professional learning that we're giving to teachers that's making the difference. But we'll be able to find big things that influence future policy, not the least the effect of electronic devices on how children learn, which is massively changing things around the world, as we've just discovered through the pandemic. Also, coming back to the pandemic, in most countries, the children who've been most hit by it have been the most vulnerable, as Rupert was saying, the ones with the weakest connections or finding it difficult to work at home, or just those children who, for lots of reasons, have got barriers to learning. And schools have coped, and certainly in this country, but most children have lost about 150 days worth of teaching. And you won't regain that by extending the school day and using every holiday and weekend to do more teaching. You will do that by helping children become better engagers with and managers of their own learning. And that, I think, is a big psychological, emotional, as well as cognitive and communicative set of skills that have to be injected alongside the content of the curriculum. There are ways, I believe, that we can do this. And I think technology, sort of what I call low-tech, high-tech, will be capable of doing that. So it's not using amazing gizmos, but it's using technology in ways that absolutely maximize very often the talk and the engagement and the dialogue, that extend it beyond the classroom.
Thanks, Pete. And it sounds like it's going to be a supremely useful resource. So I really look forward to the evidence that's coming out of that. So that's actually all we have time for today. I would encourage you all to sign up to the DEFI website, which I'm sure someone is going to put in the chat for you, and to get involved if you can in Camtree as well. But in the meantime, thank you, Rupert, and thanks to Pete, and thanks to everyone for listening. See you soon.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks, Jane.
Thanks.